Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Alena. My pronouns are she, her. Welcome to my workshop on storytelling, growing into your authentic self. This is the first time, well, I haven't spoken at a conference in a while, pandemic and all that. And this is the first time that I've thought about or compiled my content in this way. So it's kind of new for me, which means I'm like equal parts excited and kind of terrified. So thank you for being here for this. Um, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. So I've been teaching at Humber College for over 10 years now. That's my full-time job. I teach liberal studies electives there of all different kinds. And during the pandemic, I started to make TikTok videos and to write about my experience coming out later, quote unquote, later in life. And if you end up discovering either of those things and looking into them, you'll see that it's hard to believe they're the same person. The TikTok is very kind of a silly, humorous take on a lot of my experiences and the things I've learned over the years. And the writing part is the more kind of serious, emotional, emotive, feeling side. So believe it or not, they are the same person. They just are tackling kind of the same content from different ways, which has been very, like, equally healing. Do you know what I mean? Like, in different ways. So that's a little bit about who I am, and this story, my own story, is going to continue to unfold throughout the workshop today. And I feel very fortunate in the sense that storytelling, for me, has been a part of my journey towards becoming more authentic. Like, it has been an integral part of me figuring out where I've been, where I am now, and kind of looking ahead too. It's been a part of an integral part of that. And maybe it is for some of you too, or maybe you tell stories in different ways. I was on the digital brand workshop yesterday afternoon, and I heard a lot of people's accounts of the stories that they want to tell and the communities that they want to help and be involved in. So I have a feeling that a lot of you will at least relate to some of these experiences of mine. Where did I want to go next? Let's see. Next slide. So storytelling, as I said, has been integral for me in becoming in living my life more authentically. But it hasn't always necessarily been that way. I don't know if any of you remember taking liberal studies exams in universities a long time ago for me, but I still have some very vivid memories of a few instances, especially final exams, sitting down in a panicked room, getting that like empty, thick exam booklet you were expected to fill out, right? And that sheet, that examination sheet, giving you the instructions of what to do. And usually it'd be, asking you to maybe compare and contrast two excerpts from a book, or in some way to essentially work through the themes and the concepts from the course, like in real time, right? And I remember doing that, and often at the end of my paper is when I'd like come up with just like my best part, right? Like, I'd sum it all up in one powerful sentence and really like figure out what I had been wanting to say the whole time. But especially as one professor in particular, I would get the exam booklets back from her. And in red, I promise you it didn't look this bad, but she'd circle in red my like thesis at the end, my like meaning, and she'd write in big with an exclamation mark beside it, "This should have been at the beginning of your paper." Right? And I remember being so frustrated because I was like, but I didn't know it then. It felt kind of unfair that she had expected me to figure it out before having made my way through the material, right? And as a college professor now, I'm very good at prodding my students in this same way of, expecting this kind of structure to be abided by. And looking at my life, and so I will be drawing some comparisons today between like life and writing. And I feel like the first 30 plus years of my life was me following essentially the thesis, the idea about what my life should be like, that was kind of given to me by other people and other forces, right? That I was socialized into. But it turns out that I am actually much more like the bad essay. As I mentioned in my opening little intro there, I came out in my late 30s. I was married to a man. I have a child with that man. She's 8 now. And it was really only when she was really after becoming a mother that I started to see myself differently, have a different kind of connection to myself, and start this incredible journey. And so there's some things we can plan for and there's some things we can't. So life is messy, and in reality, any plans you make can be very quickly derailed. In writing, there is control, but in life, there is none, and yet we kind of try for it. So one of the things that I did along the way in my journey is really exploring those people and those forces that did give me my thesis, that gave me these ideas of what my life should be like. And I'm curious what some of your people and forces are, and I'll ask you in a few minutes. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention the kind of agenda for today. I've pieced it into 3 different parts. I'm going to sort of present a little bit and then ask you some questions, and we're going to explore those ideas, and we're going to do that basically 3 times, okay? So my family and their culture, so my mother is first generation Ukrainian Canadian. My dad emigrated here from Macedonia when he was 13. Very traditional, heteronormative expectations around what my life should be like. No concept of queerness, no acceptance of queerness. Um, Religion was also deeply tied into that for me. My grade school was literally attached to a church, a Ukrainian Orthodox church. Lots of memories growing up of like essentially learning how to judge myself. You know, like they literally line us up a couple times a year in church, 1 kid per pew, and we'd all take our turns in the confessional booth. And I remember sitting there just like thinking of sins. Like I was like, what did I do that was like not so bad, but like something? Like you need something, right? And so it was this very like fear-based, shame-based, um, kind of judgment-based relationship that I developed to myself from a long time, rather than a kind of, loving one that we all hope our kids have. And, sexuality, there's a lot of shame around sexuality, straight or not really, condemnation of homosexuality. It was all very overt in the lessons that I learned growing up. And all of these really actually tie together. Um, I'm 42. I didn't have easy access to the internet until I was in university, and I'd go to the computer lab and type up my essays. I didn't have a lot of access to just research and just discover and explore about different identities and who I might be. And that also fit with the lack of representation out there at the time too. I feel very grateful to see all the differences in shows that are now popping up that give kids growing up the opportunity to see difference, right? And to feel more accepted. And so the few kind of queer icons that were out there at the time were not really spoken about very lovingly, publicly, or within my home. And going along with this too, especially the religion part, which is something I only really realized in the last couple years, was the lack of critical thinking that came along with the kind of indoctrination that at least my religious upbringing kind of gave to me. It was like, you accept these things are truth, and rather than questioning them. And it was very easy academically for me to be critical and use my critical lens and thinking about the world and all sorts of other things. But when it came to turning that lens on myself, it took me a very long time to do that. Now, I'm curious, actually, I'll read you this first. So the first article that I published was a personal essay in Chatelaine about coming out, like in my late 30s from a marriage. And this is what I wrote about this process of letting go of all of these things. It's been a long process of letting go, of expectations of what my life should look like, of caring what other people think, of defining myself by external standards, of feeling like who I actually am wasn't good enough, of all those messages I internalized that kept me from being authentic for so long, and most of all, of a story where I was just a character instead of the author. And this is kind of one of the main themes that I hope to get across today, is this question of like authorship of your own life, right? Because looking back, I can see all the ways in which I kind of passively let life move me along, right? Rather than actively chose those paths. And now I am curious about your experiences as well. Do any of these things relate? Can you see other forces or people in your life? And this could be professionally too. I remember my mother really like like telling him like, I'm thinking of getting into psychology, and she was like, oh no, you'll think everything's wrong with you, don't do that. I was like, okay, I'll go do something else then. Like, so this influence can happen professionally too to us, right? We can feel, whether or not it's explicit, we can feel the expectations based on how they speak about different jobs and whatnot. So I'm curious what forces and people have shaped your experience and maybe prevented you early on from being the own author of your own life. Does anyone want to share? Yeah.
It's kind of almost like the opposite. Like it was actually really good, but I'm really lucky and fortunate. But my parents like also brought up religious, grandparents religious, like whatever. But my mom and dad said like no matter how badly my grandparents forced me to get baptized, they refused. They were like, we will not baptize her because if she makes her mind up eventually that she wants to be religious, she can do that. Like to be the author of her own story. And I'm like forever grateful to my parents for letting me make that choice.
Yeah, that is great. That's kind of what I've done with my daughter. I refuse to let the fear of God be hovering over her in the same way it was for me. But she's curious. I'm like, let's get some books about God, different ideas about God. Like, I want her to understand, but I don't want to like stuff it down her throat. So that's great. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
So I work at Intuit, and um, there's all these, I guess, political norms and expectations of how to behave in in a corporate setting. And you know, when you have all these amazing awards like great places to work, you know, it's what they say true. And so, um, our move to Toronto, I guess there was our celebration and welcoming to Toronto, and it was a corporate party, and I think I wanted to break some of those norms and, you know, kind of test the limits of, do I wear like a sleeveless blazer with black heels, just go in there with a statement. And that was a true testament of, can I be my true authentic self?
Yes.
And I, you know, challenged myself. Was I nervous? Oh, hell yeah. But I walked in there, you know, just shamelessly, and it was received so well. You know, you can, and I made a video about it, and it's like, you can be whoever you want, you can wear whatever you want, and now it feels like a place of home. And so I think kind of norms within the corporate culture, there is like this stereotype of what it should be, expectations. And I think here at Creative, we're slowly starting to redefine that.
Yeah. This is a great example that'll fit later on too, that you've just given about the difference between fitting in and belonging.
Yeah.
And you recognize probably what the expectations were around fitting in, but you belonged to yourself and you stepped in saying, this is who I am and I belong here, right? And rather than compromising yourself for what you expect. That's great. It's amazing. I saw a hand back there.
So I'm an Indigenous person, and it really felt like in the school system, I was never appreciated for the skill set and the value that I actually brought to a classroom. And this is my entire educational career. And I feel as though because who I was and what I was not valued, I was not pushed into certain streams that now as an adult, I actually see I excel in. Mm-hmm. I wish that there was more openness to the ways in which that I was, so that I could succeed in things that people looked me over for.
Absolutely. They had certain expectations that were lower than what you could achieve, and they naturally excluded you from those things. And then maybe sometimes we internalize those messages to be like, oh no, I'm not good at that, or I shouldn't go into that, which is really sad. But you've broken through, you've explored some of those avenues now?
Correct.
Yeah.
I feel way more confident as an adult that I see where my skill set is and how I can build on my skills despite not being invited.
Yeah, good for you. That's amazing. And I have one more here.
Yeah, so actually I went through some of the, similar background as you in terms of I was in a heterosexual marriage,
Right.
work out, I got divorced.
Yeah.
And as a woman of color, as a woman of Indian origin, with all the cultural norms associated around women, especially around my gender. So, I had to battle with that through various phases of my marriage, etc. And like it made me actually stronger in that it made me assert my independence, my personality, and it helped me actually develop or so as because prior to that I was not the author of my life.
Right.
It dictated my parents, my
Right.
in-laws, my ex-husband. Yeah. And then that made me, take charge and yeah.
Yeah, take up space, feel empowered. That's amazing. Okay, great. Okay, these are all excellent examples. Thank you for this. So my coming out was not my only major time when I realized I was not living authentically. I was unfortunate and fortunate enough to suffer what I can only describe as a spiritual breakdown and awakening. That happened a few years after my coming out. I thought coming out would be the most difficult, and then my breakdown happened, and I cried enough tears to fill an ocean. And it happened coincided with the pandemic too, which again was kind of a blessing and a curse, but I was kind of forced to deal with it. And it was after, so for coming out, it was more like an internal process for me where I started to look at my life, look at myself, and essentially it made more sense with like a queer lens on it. And looking back, it's like, oh, okay, like that all makes sense, that all fits. But my spiritual awakening came more from looking at me in relationships and looking at me in relation to other people. And it specifically happened after a breakup when I was emotionally in a devastated state. And it was like suddenly a mirror. It's like she had held up a mirror to me because the differences between us were so stark that I had to look at myself. And not like in a comparative, like she's better than me kind of way, but like truly what just happened. It was kind of one of those post relationship moments, she had all these boundaries and managed to keep them. I had zero. She had well-articulated needs. I literally didn't even know what a need was. I texted my friend once to be like, "Can you give me an example of a need?" Like I didn't know. She could make decisions. I was terrified. I was so indecisive. Could not make a decision for many reasons. I didn't know myself, so it was hard to decide. And I was so afraid of what other people thought, what she would have thought of me. So I just didn't want to make a decision because I didn't want to make the wrong decision, right? I was afraid to be judged based on the decisions I was making, essentially. And so I was contemplating this, and I remember I was writing about it because I was trying to just kind of piece together what had just happened. And I asked myself the question, I was really nice in this relationship too, I like really valued being nice. And then I was like, oh, wait a second, is it possible that I was too nice? Like, is that even a thing? And I Googled, what is a people pleaser into Google, and immediately saw like myself in the list of characteristics that came up. I don't know if any of you are familiar, but there's a lot of them. And you can imagine how detrimental this would be professionally as well as personally, some of these qualities, right? Like avoiding conflict because it makes you too uncomfortable. Not wanting to be truthful and hurt other people's feelings because that makes you uncomfortable too. Inability to say no. People pleasers end up getting stretched very thin. They say yes to everything, but then they end up resentful about it because they're just saying yes to everything and they're not allowing themselves any needs, and they're just doing everything for everyone. Conforming to other people around me as well, something I did again because I didn't know myself and I wanted to like fit in to all those other people. Essentially abandoning myself for the sake of relationships. So there's a conflict, I would bypass the problems with it and just want to reconcile, just wanted that connection like reinforced, right? So maybe some of you are recognizing yourself in here, maybe not. I wrote a HuffPost article about people pleasing and kind of being a recovering people pleaser. And this was essentially how I sum up that experience of having this realization about myself. It was like someone had held up a mirror to me, and for the first time in my life, I could truly see myself. Someone who would abandon themselves, apologize first to avoid conflict, transform into what I thought someone else wanted, and by doing so, lose myself entirely. I was that kind of, maybe I'll leave it on this one. And really, this all stems from really not knowing myself and not following my own path. And well, maybe I'll ask you now, because there's other roles that we can fall into that aren't necessarily just in these kind of dynamics. I know early on as a mother, I very much fell into the role of mother and kind of got lost in it. And I have a lot of friends who I can see that happening too. We very much like just get stuck in that role and kind of lose sight of ourselves. But there's other roles that we can get stuck in as well, that we can feel almost like we can lose ourselves in. Whether it's people pleasing as a parent, as maybe a peacemaker in a family or in relationships, as a caregiver, or even professionally in terms of being a boss or an employee, or a provider, or even a partner in relationships. And I'm wondering, maybe, I don't know, maybe for this one, we'll have you talk with like someone near you. And then we'll see if some people are willing to share if there's some roles that they have found themselves kind of fall into a little too deeply and had to pull themselves out of. Okay, so let's take just like a few minutes, turn to someone around you, one or two people, and just quickly see if there's anything that you can relate to here. Hi. Yeah, just up. Sure, go for it. It's quiet at home.
It's not too bad. It's just a little bit removed from the ceiling lights on for when we had the.
Perfect.
So
Okay.
just a little bit of
Okay, great. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, I talked right into it there. People pleasing? Oh yeah, familiar? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I know the feeling, Sarah. How many people are online? Sure. Just like this? Yeah. I was gonna say I probably blinked for the first one anyways. Okay.
Three, two, one more for safety. There.
Thanks. Has everyone had a chance to say a little bit or no? Yeah? Has everyone had a chance in your circles? Okay. Okay. Let's has everyone had a chance in their circles to kind of talk a little bit? Yeah, okay. Is anyone willing to share what they have either already known about the roles they've been playing, or if there's been any new self-discoveries in this moment? Yeah.
I just realized, kind of in talking now, how I'm too much of an employee role, and I take too much pride in being a gold star employee. I was like, oh, and this is why I'm resentful. I describe work. I'm like, I love my work. I'm so happy at work, but yeah, also a little resentful. Like, oh, this is part me.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to know. Anyone else have any discoveries? Yeah.
It was actually like the last thing that he just said. I just learned a new word, individuation.
We were talking about, like, I don't know, just realizing these different things, and especially just kind of the circumstances of, like, maybe it was you left a relationship, or like you distanced from a parent, like going to university or whatever. And so I brought up like a word that I learned, individuation, where it's like the process of becoming an individual again and becoming yourself. So yeah.
And like I didn't have the chance to say it, but like it resonated with me because I was in a long-term relationship from grade 9 to first year, and like that's a huge development period. I was very competitive in volleyball, and he was from a very small town, like no extracurriculars. Like he just wanted me all to himself. And as a 14-year-old, I didn't really like. I was like, I'm in love for the first time. I'm young. I don't know. And as I got closer to 18 and thinking about my future and thinking about playing varsity at university and stuff, I realized that he was literally making me feel horrible for like shutting my phone off to go to practice, or like I go to this huge tournament that I've worked for all year and he didn't even ask me how my game was because he's just upset that I left him. And like I started to learn more. I'm like, and kind of like the what's it called, like peacemaker, like I avoid conflict. So I was like, oh, I guess I'm doing something wrong. And it took a long time to like finally individuation. I'm like, I broke up and I finally like realized that maybe the sports was the more important thing. Like, I don't know, it's just.
Yeah, and you had to kind of become yourself again after being
Exactly.
so closely like.
Yeah, and it was 14 to 18, like that's a huge time to be with one person, and, like developmental wise. So individuation, like at 18, I went off to school single for the first time, and I had a whole like just new breath of knowledge.
Yeah.
This is how I want to see my life.
So individuate.
That's excellent. And does anyone else have one they want to share? An experience? No? Okay, that's okay. What I was going to say about this too is that these realizations are great. Even though in the moment you're like, oh man, I have, connected with this role too much. But when I first realized that I had been a people pleaser, like the moment I realized, I could feel like this sinking in my body because it felt so sad. And like I became immediately just depressed at the realization that I had been playing this role for so long. Like so much of who I was connected to this role. So on the one hand, it was depressing, but on the other hand, it was incredibly freeing because I could now split those two things apart. I could split apart, like peel apart the role, the people pleaser role I had been playing, and like authentic me, authentic Alena, right? So on the one hand, it was a sad realization, but on the other hand, it allowed me to then move forward in a different way. And I could kind of learn how to shed those behaviors and those like those stories I had been telling myself about who I was, right? So that's something to think about and consider. Now, I always struggle with endings, how to end something, but this third part, I came up with a few things that have really helped me along the way, and that I've also at some point elaborated on through storytelling. And belonging and the issue of belonging was really prominent for me when I first came out. And I was like a mom and a single person and a baby gay and like all of these different things. And it felt like being with like my peers who were all younger than me but single, they didn't really understand like the mother part of me and my experience there. And then being with moms, they didn't really get what was going on in the rest of my life. And so I felt like I was kind of inhabiting this space that like no one else really understood. And some of you, if you're moving, especially into new fields or careers, like you might feel like you're in that in-between middle space. But one thing that was important for me to think about was to learn the difference between belonging and fitting in. And Brene Brown helped me do this because she helps me do a lot of things. If you're not familiar with her, she's like a researcher and storyteller. And she has this, she's famous for this TED Talk on vulnerability that she gave that's excellent. And she wrote this about the difference. Fitting in is about assessing a situation and who you need to be in order to be accepted. Whereas belonging requires us to essentially just be who we are. Okay? So in other words, fitting in is actually an obstacle to belonging. And this made so much sense to me as the people pleaser, as a recovering people pleaser. This difference, I could see that for decades, I had been like a shapeshifter, right? I had been learning how to be like the quote unquote right person for the environment I was in, or try to be the right person for the person I was with, rather than looking internally for a sense of like just understanding who I was and belonging to myself. So really my journey towards like growing into a more authentic self has also been a process of learning how to belong to myself, okay? And so what this means is that you might sometimes feel lonely, but the hope is there if you're always belonging to yourself and not compromising yourself, then you essentially kind of belong anywhere you are because you always have that kind of solid foundation with yourself. And it might sound a little like, you know, a little poetic and whatnot, but it is an important distinction to keep in mind as you're, you know, moving through the world. So I learned these few things about it, that belonging is actually an active process. I remember looking back on even just a few years ago, I was with kind of a new friend group and we went to all hang out in someone's backyard. And I literally like stepped back and kind of like let them all sit together. It's like I had actually just excluded myself because I was like, oh no, I don't belong. Like they're kind of better friends than I am. So I'll just like let them sit and I'll just kind of be here. And I was like, why did I just do that? And I realized that it was that I thought that belonging was something that people had to give me, right? That it was something I had to wait for that external validation to get, instead of something I could just claim, right? I could just show up wearing what I want to wear in an environment that there might not be anyone else doing that, but you're belonging to yourself, and that's really the most important thing because you're not compromising who you are for the sake of the environment that you're in. And so really this connects to the second point about like looking inside for a sense of belonging rather than to external forces and people who, as we've learned along the way already, we're not necessarily going to get those things from those people, right? This is really the only place you can truly get it. Now, the second thing is about committing to your next chapter, whatever this is, whatever it is for you in particular. So before I even got anything published, and I was just kind of writing at home and I was getting all these rejection letters and things for all my pitches, I still wanted to commit in some way to becoming a writer. And so, and it might seem superficial because it was just on Instagram, but it didn't feel superficial at the time. I changed my bio so it said, writer finally writing it down. And that felt important to me because I was kind of like, it was keeping me accountable on the one hand, because I was like, listen, this is who I want to be before I'm even it. You know, I'm doing it in the background. I'm trying to kind of get my story, you know, out there. But in the meantime, this is who I am, right? I wanted to kind of be it before I actually was it and commit to that vision. And on the other hand, it was important to me because it felt like I was acknowledging the fact that I probably always was a writer, right? It was that writer was always in there somewhere, but it was just unacknowledged and unseen until much later, which is fine too. So what I want to ask you is, so some of you might be shifting into new fields or just, you know, leadership or into tech, not from tech before. And I'm wondering what steps you're taking in order to do that? If you could list one. Yeah.
Lecture.
Yeah.
Was so scared, but I decided to just do it, and it led to like a panel, then another guest lecture, and like all these, I don't know, just public speaking
Yeah.
things. So I would say like that, I guess, and just I don't know, I never thought I would do it, but it's been so like I never expected to like fall in love with it either. So
That's amazing.
probably what you're doing too.
That's what I'm doing too. I'm like trying to speak even though it's terrifying, and I'm much better on paper. But yeah, it's like do the terrifying thing,
Yeah.
right? And you might end up loving it, which you did. Anyone else? What are some like steps you're taking? I mean, you're here. This is a step, right? Is there anything else that you might add to my list of like committing, kind of belonging to yourself? You know, like being uncompromising. Yeah.
I never thought I would be a leader at some point in my life before my transition, and now I applied for a team leader role as a developer, and yeah, I did. At first, I had the imposter syndrome,
Yes.
but after 1 year, my boss is very happy of my work, and so
That's great. And it was something that you were like scared to do as well.
yeah,
That's amazing.
I didn't know I had it.
Yeah, good for you. It's amazing. Did I see another hand?
I did mine again, but if somebody else wants, yeah, it was, I don't know, I think this would be really relatable, but it's funny because I feel like I like hit a wall and I was doing design stuff and I love design. I feel like I boxed myself in as just a designer and never thought I could like do anything else. And I realized I was like, there's something missing here. And I remember making a list one day of like things that I want to explore and do. And I realized in that list that there was things consistent in my life from like so far in the past that I've always wanted to do that I didn't think I could. So then finally just like listing it down and ranking them all, and then finally like just kind of, I don't know, I've been taking steps to like execute on these things. But yeah, I guess just kind of looking and breaking it all down.
Yeah, and it seems like you were prioritizing because otherwise it can feel like I want to do these 8 things and then you never really do any of them.
Yeah, and they're all completely random.
Yeah.
It's so random.
And now for the last little exercise, I want you to think of, and if you need to talk out loud to someone to do this, you can do that too. If you could name the chapter you're currently in, okay? This chapter, moving forward, give it a title, okay? So take a few minutes to think of a title for the chapter that you're currently in and trying to sort of take into the next, okay? So if you need to talk it out, or you can just think to yourself.
That's
Does anybody come up with any already? Did you manage? Okay. All right, maybe we can see if anyone is willing to share the name of their next chapter. Are there any people who are willing to share?
Should
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can we listen up? Yeah.
I think my favorite chapter would be called like something about adjusting, but then I realized it's a Taylor Swift lyric that's I've been having a hard time adjusting from one of my favorite Taylor Swift songs.
That's great.
So I think that would probably be it, just because I just started high school this year.
Yeah.
I'm taking a couple extra courses, and it's been a lot of work. And I've also had some other stuff going on, so I guess I'm getting used to that.
I love that. I love that. So I've had a hard time adjusting. That's what it's called. I mean, that's great, because another point I considered including was that idea of like just having kind of kindness and compassion to yourself, to be like, it's going to be hard. I'm going to make mistakes no matter what my next chapter is, no matter what my vision is. I'm gonna mess up sometimes, and then you'll refocus, and just kind of being like patient with yourself, which I feel like kind of fits with that as well. That's great. Are there any other chapters people want to share? Yeah.
Yeah, I think with everything that's happening right now, and it's been so progressive, take up space.
Take up space. I love that.
Take up space.
Yeah.
I think it's important that as we continue to evolve, and there's just so much good happening right now. We need to do more of that, especially for culture. And I see it within my own eyes, us progressing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, great. Take up space. I love it. Are there any others?
Finding the right balance would be my future chapter.
Mm-hmm.
I know sometimes like it's difficult for me because I really enjoy my work.
Mm-hmm.
It's very fulfilling, but by discussing, she made me realize that it's also taking me a lot of energy. So I need to balance with my personal life, and that would be the next chapter.
That's great. Not lose sight of the other, like self-care. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Be visible as your true, authentic self.
Instead of hiding away, or not being sort of brave enough to be it. Yeah, that's great. Oh, they're all so nice. I had a hard time thinking of one, because I feel like my current chapter is a bit of a contradiction between like I haven't been publishing a lot lately, but I've been doing a lot of writing behind the scenes. I'm trying to write like different things. I'm hoping to talk too, so it's kind of like behind the scenes, but also in the spotlight. I don't know. I'm like, it's a bit of a contradiction. I don't know what it's going to be yet. But anyways, okay. Well, thank you for going through all of these exercises with me. Endings, like I said, are always really hard for me. I spend so much time, like, I don't know if you're like that too, if you're writing something, like the last sentence, the last paragraph is always so important to me. I spend so much time on it, because it's that place, like I would have a lot to argue with my professor from university now about things coming at the end, because I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that's in fact more reflective of how our life actually works, right? You go through stuff and then you're like, ah, that's what I was just doing. Oh, that's what this means. And then you're like, okay, this is what I've learned, and then you move into a next chapter, right? So like the endings are where we pull things together, and where we can find meaning, and where we can look back and see where we just were and where we are now, right? So So I want to keep that in mind moving forward, and also know like whatever old chapter you're putting to bed, it means you're just at the start of this new one, which is something to really celebrate and be proud of yourself for. So thank you for joining me today. I think we're going to end there, and I'm going to, if you want to connect with me in any way, you can find me in all those places. Are there any questions that anyone has, or any sort of things I brought up that you want to hear more about or discuss more?
I have one question about people pleaser.
Yeah.
Is there any advice, like, because when I read the list, I definitely see someone in my life that is a people pleaser,
Yes.
but this person doesn't know.
Right.
So is there any advice that you can share with me to make them realize?
I mean, I guess it depends. That's a tough one. Because it's hard to show people themselves sometimes, right? It's like they have to come to that conclusion. I guess you have to look for openings. If there's an opening where you see one of those behaviors, like if they're being indecisive or something, be like, you know, I've noticed it's really hard for you to make a decision. Do you know why that is? Or it depends on the person. If they're a person who's really open to these kinds of conversations about like identity and self-awareness, then it'd be much easier for you to say, hey, I just heard this thing about people pleasing, and some of those things like felt really similar to things you've done. But if they're a person who's just going to become defensive and then like disconnect from you, then you don't want to like lose that friendship for the sake of bringing it up. So it really depends on the person. But they can, or send them one of my articles.
By the way.
Yeah, maybe that'll help. Any other questions or comments or anything anyone wants to elaborate on or add? Yeah.
I have a personal question. I'm curious. You said your Instagram said writer starting to put.
Writer finally writing it down. Yeah.
How long ago did you actually start writing?
I started writing in like 2021. That was it. I've published a bunch since then, like about coming out later in life or people pleasing. I've written on that. Dating. I have a couple like failed love stories out there that are always fun and heart wrenching to write. And I've wrote an op-ed for the Globe and Mail about like heteronormativity in healthcare, which was kind of a different. So I'm also trying to like write in different avenue or different venues as well. But yes, it was only during the start of the pandemic I started putting it all together. So yeah. But now I'm trying to write other things like a script and manuscript, and so who knows? Trying to push the boundaries. Any other questions? No?
Is it possible to connect with you and ask for some feedback on some of our own writings?
Sorry, what did they say? Is it possible to connect?
To connect with you and ask feedback on their own writings.
Oh, possibly, yeah. You can find me. Well, my email address too is just alena.papayanis@gmail.com, and you can connect with me and we can chat. I'd love to hear about your writing.
Thank
Anyone
you.
else? No? Okay, well that's it for today. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks for the, yeah, thank you.